decade, there's been a lot of progress in privacy. There's been a lot of progress on privacy-enhancing technologies. You've heard about differential privacy, federated learning, secure multi-party computation, and a lot of tools built for industry and developers to manage their data, for corporations to manage their data. And so we're doing a lot better on that front, and companies are now able to be compliant with the laws that are evolving. And so that's been great progress. But the one part of this area where we have not made a lot of progress is helping users, okay? They still have a huge number of decisions to make. They often don't even know what choices they have, or they can't find them, and if they do, and they try to set some privacy settings, they're not even sure if it's actually working or what they do, and there's just a lot of confusion and a lot of lack of awareness with the users. So what I want to talk about today is building privacy assistance to help users, okay? There have been a number of really cool things, actually, that came out of academia in the last 5, 6 years or so. So I'll give you some examples, and I'll show you what people have tried to build. However, these things haven't really seen uptake in industry. And so I'll talk a little bit about why that's not happening. Then the second part of the talk, I'll talk about what we really should be doing here is understanding more specifically what users really want and where they need help. And then finally, I'll talk about foundation models and what they can bring to this space. So what do I mean by privacy assistant? It's basically an intelligent agent that can answer questions or offer you advice about a variety of things, including helping you understand, say, the privacy posture of an app or a service. You know, nobody reads privacy policies, so that doesn't help users. Google Play has safety labels on their apps in the Play Store. The Apple App Store has what's called privacy nutrition labels, meant to explain to you what's the purpose of collecting a piece of data in their app. So that's a good step forward, but it's a small piece, and it's, you know, those explanations are, you know, 4 to 6 words, so users don't really get it too well. The big area is helping people manage privacy controls, and we're going to talk a lot about that. There are other things you could do. You could inform users of privacy risk. Now, this is actually really hard because after like over a decade, we as academics are still not very good at actually measuring risk or creating risk metrics that don't require a PhD in statistics to understand. Other things privacy assistants could do is to actually make decisions on behalf of users. And over time, if they kind of watch the choices you make, they could even really, you know, learn and enforce your preferences for you. So let me give you a few examples of what's been tried so far. So one of the challenges in the privacy world is managing the apps on your smartphone. Okay, these things ask for access to your contacts or your location, your microphone, and you have to decide if you accept it or deny it, or maybe you allow it sometimes. And users have typically, the average number of apps on a smartphone ranges somewhere between 60 and 80, depending on which survey you look at. So that's a lot of choices. Sometimes users will make the effort to do it, and often they just ignore it and go straight through because they want to get going and use their app. So it would be really nice if we had an app that could actually give you recommendations. Should I accept this or not? And that could be based on your previous history. So it would actually capture your privacy recommendation, your privacy preferences. So this idea was actually first proposed by Professor Norman Sadeh at Carnegie Mellon. And he and his team built actually a very cute app. And what they're doing here is, let's see, does this, okay, anyway. The first thing here, it says to you, they look at what's going on your phone, and they show you, while you're traveling, local apps have accessed your location 100 times in the last 2 days. If you are aware of that, you might actually change your, your opinion about whether you should allow location access. And it asks you some questions. Do you like that? And after getting some questions and seeing what you do, it can make you some recommendations. Based on your answers, I have 11 suggestions, okay? And then you can accept them or not. So that's actually a really nice idea. Now, this was proposed a while back, I guess almost a decade ago. And originally at that time, this was built on pretty simple models. They got a whole bunch of users to agree to give them data about the choices they'd made. It was a classic recommendation system of, learning from users like you. And I think they actually may have used very simple SVM, as a sort of machine learning model to do that at the time. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the approaches some of these things use, and you'll see how they're kind of moving forward over time on the sort of more and more sophisticated ML technologies. So another big challenge is dealing with the IoT environment, and here probably the biggest challenge is that the users don't even know what devices are in the room. So we heard a nice talk by Rahul Chatterjee yesterday about IoT, and he also discussed this the lack of awareness about the devices in the room. So you could imagine a useful privacy assistant in this context were to be something that discovers the devices for you. And then actually, once they're discovered, it also could surface to you some choices you might have about privacy settings. So that's a pretty hard thing to do. You know, it's got to discover the infrastructure, learn what the device is, try to figure out what your options are, and present it to you in a way where the user interface isn't too overwhelming. But there's also been some nice work here by some folks in North Carolina State in collaboration with Carnegie Mellon, and they built this infrastructure to do device discovery, and having discovered the devices, they need to figure out even, you know, exactly which version of the manufacturer it was in order to figure out the options. But this is just a little snapshot from the app they built where it's showing you 2 devices it discovered, and if you click on options, you know, it'll tell you what your options are for settings. Okay. Now, a very different kind of privacy app here deals with privacy challenges. You all know nobody reads privacy policies. They're too long and they're full of legalese. So wouldn't it be nice if we had a chatbot that we could just talk to and engage about that and could, you know, I think most people, when they install an app, if they're interested in privacy, they're probably interested in 1 or 2 things. Not everything that's in the policy, but maybe they just want to know what happens to their location information. So it's a really nice idea. This was proposed originally by Hamza Harkouz back in 2018. I thought it was a really great idea the first time I saw this thing, where you could just talk to a chatbot and say, you know, does this app share my location with other businesses? And it'll answer you, because it can process and analyze the privacy policy using NLP techniques by itself. So very quickly, just one piece of information about how this was built. They used an annotated data set that was actually extremely useful, actually compiled at Carnegie Mellon, where they got up over 100 policies, and they had a combination of engineers and law students who annotated all this stuff, and annotated the pieces of the privacy policy that talked about data retention and which parts about, you know, third-party sharing. And with all these annotations, it subsequently, you know, made it easy. They used this on an early transformer model where they could, you know, the automation can go and find the relevant part of the privacy policy very quickly for you and just surface an answer to your question. Okay, another one. This is actually one of my favorites, developed at Wisconsin, University of Madison, Wisconsin. This is for dealing with cookies on the web, okay? And ideally, people who are privacy conscious would like to put all your cookies on websites into what's called essential mode only. Only enable the cookies that are absolutely needed. So this would be a cool thing if we could automate that. And what the folks at Madison did, but before that, let me just say, the problem with cookie banners, I'm sure you're well aware, is that all these websites use all kinds of crazy dark patterns to confuse you, all right? So the first one here is the worst, because you only have a choice to accept. You don't even have any other choices. The second one has this wording, the 2 buttons. One says, reject non-essential. Now you have to stop and think here. This is double negative. Like, what does that really mean? Down at the bottom, it's a little better, but they use the word essential in both options. So again, you have to stop and try to figure out what they mean, and it's not always clear. So people get lost in this stuff. The other one are websites that you go to. This is a little animation here, where you actually have to click through a series of like 3 or 4 pages to actually go and find what it is you want to do. And at this point, most people stop. They don't go 4 levels deep into a menu just to set their cookies. So what these folks did was they actually scraped all the sort of the UI elements in websites. And so look, if you're looking at the top one, and if you pick, you know, customize settings, you get the bottom menu. You see you got 4 more buttons there. And what they did was, I thought, very clever. They basically figured out all of the buttons, what they do, and the sort of path that you click through the buttons. And they created a training data set where the input here Tells you all the buttons and what they do. You know, the double lines are the ORs, the double stars means you're going down into a deep menu, so there's a particular format, but they've converted the pass through the buttons into a text stream. And the output is the set of buttons you need to click to get to essential mode only. And then they did this many times, and they used that as a training set with a T5 model. And the hypothesis was that if I have this kind of training data, I could build a model that if I go to a new website I haven't seen before, it could predict what the path would be to get you to essential only mode. So that's not intuitive that that would work, actually, but the good news is that this thing had about a 94% correctness rate, where it would correctly guess the path at a 94% of the test cases they looked at. So again, another very nice idea. And the last one I want to show you is also about when you go to this is again for the web, and you go to a social media site, or you go to even your favorite newspaper, often you are presented with a set of privacy options. But again, it's hard to navigate. And what these guys did, this was also work that came out of Wisconsin-Madison, was that they would find the controls so you don't have to navigate multiple pages. And the idea was to present you a single-click view. So here's what you can control. You make a yes-no decision, and you're done in one click, right? Because in this case, so this is a famous social media site you all know, but if you want to go and change your notification settings here, you again have to click through a menu system that's 4 levels deep. So the build that they did here instead is that you go to a simple web extension, you type what you're looking for, and it will just surface to you because it's figured out what the controls are. You type yes or no, and it will go execute the controls in the system on your behalf. So again, I'll just say briefly, this works by, they scraped the HTML pages, they had to do some HTML parsing and some JavaScript processing. The text is converted into text embeddings. The UI elements have to be captured as well. Create a series of dense layers, and you've got your sort of predictable thing. This is just the first step in their solution where they're trying to figure out where is the page where these privacy controls live. Okay, so all of these things I showed you, this one and cookie essential only mode, and even the privacy policies, were built effectively on custom architectures, all right, which means they're really, we have to rebuild a new architecture for every assistant you build. And they all have to have their own training data. And so it's really cumbersome to build a privacy system that does sort of one aspect of the privacy controls people need. All right, so why haven't these things been picked up in industry? I feel there's 3 really fundamental challenges. The first one is a matter of liability. So if you think about the app recommendation system that advises you what to do with your permissions on your apps, obviously, it's great for users if they can have one privacy assistant that tells them what to do with all their apps, right? So you don't have to have 100 privacy assistants. However, whichever company provides you this thing, if it's a startup or even a large company, that app is actually, for example, recommending you turn location off in Facebook, Facebook could lose money. They're not going to be very happy. So they might come back and give you a hard time. In the worst case, they might sue you. So no individual private company wants the responsibility of telling you what to do with somebody else's app. This is probably the single biggest problem, in my opinion, with a lot of this stuff. Because as I said, you don't want 100 privacy apps to help you with all of your systems. The second one is that some of these apps, you have to give up privacy to get privacy. I mean, the privacy assistant itself needs to see all of your previous choices so it can learn your preferences. So a lot of people might find a privacy assistant a creepy thing in some ways. And finally, and this is a problem, it's just this is just generally on the web, too many decisions to make, people opt not to do it. And the privacy assistant also has to make sure it doesn't go down this path of presenting you complex decisions that you actually don't understand. So we'll come back to, talk about these again later on in the talk. So having said all of that, what kind of privacy assistant should we actually be building that users want and that we actually can build and deploy? So, to answer this question, we should find out what users want or what they're struggling with, their issues are, and there's been lots of studies about understanding users. But one of the key issues here is that we really want to understand users at scale, all right? So almost everyone who builds a software product these days deploys it in very many countries and in very many languages. So it's not enough to study in one country what some people think about privacy. However, so I'll just say a couple words about the traditional way we study users are either through surveys or through user studies. And all of the approaches to study users, I'm not trying to sort of denigrate any of these things, they all have different trade-offs, different advantages and disadvantages. So user studies, you interview people, so you only maybe find out what 30 people think, but the advantage is you actually can talk to them, there's follow-up, you can go in depth as to what the issue is, but it's a tiny scale. The other option is surveys. Maybe you ask 5,000 people. If you have a lot of money, you ask 10,000 people what they think. Still not a great scale. And the other thing is that these surveys are extremely structured. All the questions are organized in advance. So you might actually not ask someone what the main issue they care about. If it's not on your survey question, you'll never find out. The advantage of surveys is that they're repeatable, okay? So you can do this every year and you can have sort of a consistent tracking method. But we asked ourselves, this is work I've been doing with my team at Google over the last few years, how can I find out what millions of people think, and like across the whole globe? So we have a couple of papers we published about that, but the idea we decided was obviously to take a very large public corpus of things users write, and we took apps off the the reviews of apps off the Google Play Store, and decided to try to do the following things. So in a nutshell, we built a system that takes these things. Users can write about anything in there, right? Anything at all. And what we need to do is build an NLP pipeline that extracts the reviews that write about privacy, so any aspect of privacy very broadly defined, and then do a lot of things, other things with it, right? There's a lot of we built a sort of two-level clustering system where at the highest level we get these themes about like unneeded access, and then at a finer level that can be broken down into like unneeded location and unneeded camera access. So the fine-grained tags are useful, say for developers who might want to know what they should fix because they're very directive. But for researchers, and or leadership in companies, they want to know the high-level themes. So that's why we did this sort of two-level system. With reviews, another nice thing you get is that we can actually count how many people are writing about something. So that allows us to relatively, stack rank themes. And we also built an emotions classifier, something that attaches tags such as anger, fear, confusion to these things. And that turns out to be very useful for the following reason. I often say to people that if you want to understand privacy and what users are writing, it only takes one person to launch a lawsuit. So if you really want to fix your product, go look at what makes people angry, because those are the people who might do something about it. The people that are confused are unlikely to launch a lawsuit. The confusion emotion is useful to developers for another reason, because confusion usually arises when the UX isn't great, right? And that's, so at least sort of the direction you should go to fix things. But so we did all that, and just very quickly, this is kind of what the system looks like. We take all the reviews. First, we had to build a privacy classifier. I'm not going to tell you how this works. I suggest if you're interested to read our papers. Once we've extracted the privacy reviews, we did this sort of low-level issue generation, turned it into high themes, got the emotions, and we have then all of these annotations on the privacy reviews, which I think you can imagine allows a lot of very rich analysis. So then what we did is we took 10 years of reviews off the App Play Store, and I'm just going to show you a few brief highlights about some of the things we learned. So we took 2 billion reviews initially, and we extracted about 12 million about privacy. Now, I do want to tell you that what we did here is we only took apps that had like 10,000 installs and over 1,000 reviews, because we wanted to focus on apps that people really use. So there's actually more than 12 million, probably more than 12 million privacy reviews, but a lot of them are on really lightly used apps, and we didn't want to focus on that. So this data set of 12 million privacy reviews, to my knowledge, is probably the single largest repository of privacy text that we have from users. And interestingly, it comes from over 200 countries, and we did this in 25 languages. So we translated the reviews into English, and we did all the processing in English, except for the emotions. I will tell you the emotions we did in the native language, because that's something that really doesn't survive translation. So that was important to do in the native language. So a few findings. What is the #1 issue that people around the globe care about? It's data deletion. All right, users overwhelmingly want to delete data. They can't quite figure out how to do it. They don't know what they have the options to delete, and so on. The second one is a bucket. We have to, this is unfortunate, but we have to, it's called privacy concerns. We need something like that because a lot of people write, privacy's terrible, period. And they don't tell you why they're saying that. So that just goes into this generic bucket. It captures a negative sentiment, but it's not informative as to why they're concerned. Data theft comes from, a lot of that is coming from financial apps where people feel they're being scammed, loan apps, I should say. And you see a variety of things here. One thing that was interesting to me is that location concerns is 9th on the list of the top 10. And I think in the academic community, we're very focused on location privacy. We maybe unconsciously assume that's the top issue, but it's actually not. Let me just say here that, looking at this list, you might think, well, maybe the kind of privacy assistant that I should build should be something that helps people with data deletion. Now, the other thing we wanted to look at that we could do with this data set was to figure out how widespread are these issues around the globe. We have a very simple metric here. So for every country, we calculated the top 5. And if, like, for example, data deletion is in the top 5 for any country, then we count that country in our count. So 47 there means there are 47 countries for whom data deletion is a top 5 privacy concern. That's a lot. That is a lot. So this issue is, it's not just 1 or 2 countries that care about this or want help. 47 is pretty widespread. So this, I just want to show you, with the latest tools we have, I forgot to say, but the original models we built were based on T5 models. We actually started this before ChatGPT showed up. Over time, you can imagine we've been refining our models, and now they are more sort of classic LLM-based stuff. But once you've got everything categorized, so we have a theme about data deletion, we know all the reviews that are in there. In this case, what we sometimes do is you sort of randomly sample maybe 10,000, 20,000, and throw them into Gemini or Notebook LM. Maybe you guys have heard about this very cool new product from Google, and ask it for a summary. And so this can tell you, what are people writing about data deletion? So as I said, they can't find the controls. Even if they try it, it appears not to have worked. So somehow, they see something that makes them think something wasn't actually deleted. And you can see down here that this occurs for all different types of data. Okay, so over a wide variety of apps. So just for fun, I want to show you this thing about emotions. So we kind of, I tried to some extent to order this. You see on the left is the red, and on the green is actually joy. So joy captures like admiration and gratitude. There's a few things bucketed into that. We have 28 emotions, but here I'm showing 9 of them. So on the top is the stuff that people are really angry and annoyed about. And this is what we saw: data deletion, data theft, unwanted data collection. They're also pretty upset with this middle category, which is about excessive permissions. I'm sure this is not a surprise to anyone. But what I found most interesting here was the bottom section, where people seem pretty happy with this stuff, actually. But if you look at the apps that are in here, these are special apps that help you with content hiding, app locking, so like, no one who's also sharing your device can see which apps you have on your device. Some of the apps that were in these categories include like diary apps, and the ability to really carefully control the content on your device and who sees it. Private chat, and these things work. I mean, these are things designed to offer you privacy services, but people like them. Okay, and they write about it, actually. So when I first started this, I thought, well, all we might ever see is sort of negative feedback, but that's not the case. In fact, almost a third of our data was sort of privacy positive feedbacks. So let's have a quick look where this stuff comes from. Okay, India's #2. Thank you. So here we see the US, India, Indonesia, Brazil, Turkey. So on the one hand, this is not at all surprising because these countries are with huge populations. However, it is surprising to a lot of researchers because I think many people in this field, Europeans are known to be very privacy aware, and we would somehow maybe guess that they would be actually the largest contributors here. But many European countries, as individual countries, are not that big from a population perspective. So in fact, we're getting a lot more feedback from Asia than expected, and it's a big part of this data set. So just for fun, some people also hypothesize that privacy is influenced by culture and by language and religion, and that's all true, but it's sort of ambiguous as to exactly how and how much. And India is such an enormous country that I have no doubt there's tons and tons of different attitudes about privacy here. So it's natural to ask the question, do nearby countries have the same kind of privacy concerns? So very quickly, we did this little calculation on our part where every country is just represented by a vector, and each element in the vector is the fraction, so in this case 14% is the first one, that's the fraction of all the privacy reviews written by this country on the topic of data deletion. So this is kind of a histogram of, among all the things you write about privacy, what fraction of it is each particular topic. And using this, we did hierarchical clustering with complete linkage, and ended up with a world map that looks like this. All right. So on the one hand, we see some of the Anglo countries, the US, England, Australia, that are all orange, pretty similar kinds of, these are, again, this is what people write about in privacy. I'm not going to say it's privacy preferences. That's the wrong interpretation, given the data we have. It's what they choose to write about. And in sort of, South America there's maybe that separates into two groups. Central America is largely purple. However, we see some things that are surprising. So you can see that Europe bifurcates into two groups. The Middle East also splits. There's sort of a green group and a yellow group. The other thing that's interesting about this that was a surprise to us is that this clustering exercise shows that there are a few countries that are in a cluster of size 1. All right, so they really have a very different focus on privacy than everybody else. So that includes Turkey, actually Pakistan, and Indonesia are all in there, okay? Indonesia, there was really a lot of trouble with scams and financial loan apps. Those have happened all around the globe, but it was really bad in Indonesia for a while. That was their thing that made them very different. In Pakistan, there's a lot of focus on fingerprinting and concern about government surveillance. In Turkey, there was it's a different issue, but there was a widespread misunderstanding that probably happened on social media, where people thought that in the reviews, they could tell the developer what they wanted for privacy. They were writing, you can do this and you can't do that in the reviews. So they really misunderstood that what they write in the review is not the privacy they're going to get. So anyway, some of these one-off events were so large that it sort of made those countries have their own unique properties. So the answer to the question is not really, okay? You can't assume nearby countries are the same, or certainly not in any consistent fashion. Lastly, I just want to show you what are the main apps that are getting all the sort of negative privacy reviews. Really, these 5 categories are categories that are on the Play Store, but if you really look at it, the first 2 are about finance, the third one is social networks, and the last 2 are about kids, all right? So those are really the 3 topics. And again, I'm pointing this out because if you want to think about what kind of privacy assistant you should build, what might be the first thing you should target, maybe one should focus on financial apps and social networks as well. So since I'm giving this talk in India, I said, okay, I should pull out the information and see what Indians are actually writing in this thing, just for fun. And so we got about 11,000 apps that have a lot of privacy reviews. Again, these are only the ones that have substantial sort of uptake, and 87,000 reviews from India. And just to show you very quickly, I'm showing here maybe the top 12 or so. Unsurprisingly, there's a lot of overlap. People are concerned about data privacy and excessive permissions, and many of the things are the same. There are a couple things that are different. India had content hiding as number 3. That's not even on the list over here for the rest of the world. And chat privacy, I guess, is something that's valued. So just to show you one example, what is content hiding really talking about? Here, people are really wanting controls, specific controls on their photos and videos and messages, and sort of hiding things or controlling that. And sometimes they ask for a chat option. Sometimes they say, I can't hide my profile pics or from a subset of people on my contact list. They were also writing about things where they tried to hide files, and after an app update, the files sort of reappeared. Anyway, so interestingly, there's a lot of interest in this. Just one other fun difference here is about Google Pay. So in the United States, most people are complaining about Google Pay asking for too many permissions. But India is actually very unique, and this is a top issue here. Many people want the ability to delete transaction history. You don't really see that anywhere else, but there was a substantial amount of commentary on this from India. And I'm guessing that the reason for that, again, this is just my own guess, is that perhaps there are many devices in India that are shared, and people don't want someone else who they share the device with to see their financial transactions. Now, I think most banks obviously need to keep a history of your transaction record. I don't know that they could actually delete them, but they could offer better controls in terms of hiding them better, right? So when you share a device with someone, it's not visible to other people. All right, so very quickly here, just summarizing some of this stuff. You know, if you wanted to build an assistant, like I said, let's start with data deletion. It's the biggest issue. It's across the globe. And the kind of apps one might focus on are social media, financial apps, and things related to children. Okay, now what about foundation models? What are they bringing here? How's this going to change the landscape going forward? So I'm going to talk, so, you know, we could use LLMs to take some of these things we've seen before, some of the kind of privacy assistance we looked at, and make them better, okay? Because these models are very good at understanding language, having chats with people. We could make them better. But there are other things we could do. We can also ask ourselves, you know, there is I'm sure you're all well aware, a sort of proliferation, a lot of energy being put right now into building personal digital assistants. Things to help you not just book restaurants, but book medical appointments, arrange your vacation, manage your exercise, everything. It would be very interesting to make those things privacy aware, okay? Or people are calling it privacy conscious agents. So I'll tell you in a sec what that really means. You could even think about these large models, the very large models, you know, ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini. Can we make those things privacy conscious? And so what do I mean by this? So a privacy conscious agent is an agent that, you know, if it's engaging and doing things, it's your personal assistant doing stuff on your behalf, it's only going to share the data that's relative to what it's doing at that moment. So it's aware of what's appropriate for a given context to share and not to share. Moreover, it hopefully will be aware of the user's privacy preferences. So that is a big, you know, that is a huge ask. We are far away from that, but it's a great goal. Let me just give you examples about exactly what this means. So say I have some personal agent, then it knows some data about me, like my phone number, my health data, maybe my relationships, and it is engaging with a restaurant booking service, and the service says, you know, can I get your data to book a table? Now, the word data here is not specific, but, you know, this personal agent realized, okay, phone number makes sense. That's what you need when someone wants to book a reservation. But if this third-party service is sneaky or malicious, they could put in their question or in their prompt something that kind of changes the context a little bit. And if you're not privacy aware, you know, you're just going to answer the question, you might reveal more data than what you should. So it might say, a sneaky question would be to say, share the health data with me so I can plan for allergies. So that's sort of related to a restaurant reservation. Some people tell restaurants ahead of time that they are, you know, gluten-free or gluten allergic or something. But if the agent just said, okay, I've got health data, they're asking for health data, turn it over. Okay, that's obviously not what we want to happen. So this kind of attack, you've heard the term prompt injection, but in this case we call it sort of content hijacking, because what the attacker is doing is really trying to change the context, okay? And then sort of get the agent to reveal more than it should. Now, preventing this kind of thing is pretty hard. All right, if you look at some of the privacy-enhancing technologies we have, differential privacy is not really sort of context-aware. We can't have a solution where we have a long access control list that sort of enumerates all the kind of cases we have, because that clearly doesn't scale. So one thing that helps and is an important part of the story is actually context, right? Because we're hoping here the agent will be able to understand this is a restaurant context, different from booking a medical appointment, so I can share what's relevant. So contextual integrity was introduced by Helen Niesenbaum back in 2004. And her statement was, you know, the theory of contextual integrity is defining it's a flow of information that is appropriate within privacy norms, okay, and within the expectations of that context. So how do we actually use this? It's a great idea at a high level, a legal idea, but how do we actually do this? So I'll give you a couple examples here. There was a nice paper called Air Gap published this year in CCS in 2024. They had the kind of following idea, that they would use two LLMs. So you have the personal agent that's interacting with your third-party service. And then they also build this thing called a minimizer. And the minimizer, ahead of time, before any engagement, with a sort of a restaurant booking agent or your medical planning service, would sort of do these calculations for a given task. What is the sort of minimum amount of data or appropriate data that I should reveal? So if the task is book a restaurant, I can reveal a phone number, okay? If the task is to book a medical appointment, maybe I could say why I'm booking a medical appointment, and maybe you could reveal something about someone's diet, that they are diabetic, or whatever it is. But the point of this idea was that this minimizer doesn't interact with a third-party service. They're kind of putting an air gap in there, and the personal agent, even though it might get a sort of sneaky prompt that's trying to trick it, it can only reveal what the minimizer will give it in terms of data. So this is a super condensed summary of all that they did, but the team that did this, they built about 6 agents. One was a medical appointment booking, restaurant booking, vacation planning, and so on. They built 6 agents like that. They built a large repository of this sort of context hijacking prompts. And then they tested those agents, and they found that the amount of data that was protected was about 45%, meaning 55% personal data leaked. All right, they had a whole system for building this, so I don't have time to go into that. But then when they added their air gap solution, they were actually able to protect 96%. So this is a great direction, but the authors would acknowledge that there's a lot of limitations here, right? Like the whole way that they built user profiles and features about users, it was all a bit contrived. So there's a lot more work to do, but at least it's a promising step forward. Okay, now let's come to this question. I find this really fascinating. Can you make an LLM privacy aware of privacy norms? And what does that even mean? All right. Obviously, the idea here is that if LLMs were aware of privacy norms, they could use that knowledge, right, and they would limit privacy leakage. So the first thing you want to do is to ask yourself, well, what are the privacy norm awareness of LLMs today? So there's a nice paper recently published by folks at Stanford and Northeastern called Privacy Lens. It's a great read. I would encourage you to read that. And they started with the very base case of, let's not talk about malicious actors. Let's talk about natural mistakes that humans make, or things we don't necessarily think of. So to give you some examples, here's an example of Ravi, who works at a company. He asks his personal agent, to create an email to send to his manager summarizing his weekly activities, because maybe Ravi's manager wants a weekly summary of what he does. So he gives agent access to his email and his calendar. All right, but Ravi forgot that on his calendar he's actually interviewing for another job, and he put an appointment on there. All right, so you can see what would happen, inadvertent mistake, but normally you wouldn't want to reveal. That would be private information to Ravi. Another case is Priya also wants to use a personal agent to send a summary to her manager, but summarizing, let's say, team status updates. And in this case, she gives agent not just email and calendar, but also access to her messages. And earlier in the week, she'd had a private message exchange with some of her direct reports, and she found out someone on her team is getting a divorce. And when that person confided in Priya, it was obviously most likely meant to be a private, not to be forwarded on to the manager. So that would be a pretty bad violation of privacy norms if that email got created and sent. So how do you, again, coming back to how we test an LLM for privacy norms, we have to actually state or identify or codify what privacy norms are. Okay, so incredibly hard task, but they gave it a very good start. So the first thing they did is to look at a lot of the privacy laws, things that are just not okay by legal methods. They looked through a whole bunch of research papers that sort of really make it very clear what things, examples of what people consider violating a norm. And then they built this schema that relies on this idea of contextual integrity, and this is how we kind of codify contextual integrity, you just create like a 5-tuple. Some people use a 6-tuple, where you specify the data type, who it's about, who's sending it, the recipient, and how you transmit it, right? So here's just a very simple example from what I showed you. We're talking about job interviews. It's about Ravi. Ravi's also the sender in this case, going to his personal manager, and it's being sent by email. So, the idea of this Privacy Lens paper was they wanted to get a whole bunch of these privacy norms. So they collected about 500 examples. In the paper they talk about, they used a crowdsourcing tool with partial success, and then they used some experts to create some more. Again, this might be exactly what it sort of looks like. But they also used ChatGPT and some of these LLM models to add a little vignette, they call it, this maybe doesn't really have enough information in here to help you reason about privacy. So they create these like very short little stories about what's really going on here. And then in their system, they used this thing and they asked, an LLM to actually do the task. And they did that because they wanted to create what they call trajectories. The LLM, to do this, will have to do a bunch of steps. So it's going to go access the email, then it's going to go access chat, then it's going to sort of summarize things, then it'll condense it into a short email. And each of these actions that the LLM is taking and the output it learns is an observation that could be leaked, right? So they have all this stuff that they created, and they use it in two interesting ways. The first is to say, what is an awareness of the norms? And so they took their prompts, all of their privacy norms, and they have this very simple prompt. Is it acceptable for the sender to share this to that person, and so on? And they asked a bunch of LLMs, okay? So the vast majority of the time, the answer should be no here. And actually, to their surprise, and my surprise too, actually, the LLMs are reasonably aware of privacy norms. They got the vast majority of these things right. Now, it's only 500. There's many more we could try. But it shows that they've been trained on so much content that there is an awareness. Somehow they've captured some of this in their knowledge. But this isn't the end of the story. Now the next question is, do they use this knowledge, right? And not so good here in this case, right? So in this case, they used those trajectories they created, and they ran it in a simulated environment. And they asked some LLMs to actually do the tasks that were being asked. And they found out that all of these things, about a third of the time, they will leak a lot of private data. So LLMs understand a bunch, but they're not using it. So I think this is a bit of a long-term research direction, but a very interesting one about how can we make LLMs actually leverage the knowledge they sort of already have. All right, I'll just summarize by saying that privacy assistance could help a lot. I think it'd be interesting to focus on data deletion, social media, financial apps. There's a lot of things you could focus on. You could build many, many things here. Users across the globe have a broad variety of needs, so there's a lot of help that's needed. One thing that my personal opinion is that we should avoid a proliferation of privacy assistants. People aren't going to use 50 of them or whatever it is. But this comes back to the challenge we saw originally about, if you have one assistant across many apps or many web services, depending on what it does, there can be sort of a legal liability thing. Now, my own view is there's a few things to think about here. Some kinds of services, like the cookie thing, the automatic enforcement of essential only mode in cookies, really is that you can do across multiple services, because if the user agrees to do it, it's really very clear what the intention is, and you're doing the same thing everywhere. So it's not like any one website is getting a worse output than another for a single user. I do think, I don't know, I'm not a lawyer, but I think that all the personal digital assistants that are being developed are going to push the boundaries in the legal world a little bit. Those agents are all going towards the model where they act on your behalf. So if we're doing this everywhere else, except in the privacy world, maybe there'll be some other models of consent that come out where you can consent with one click to a bunch of stuff. So I don't know, but I think those things are going to get revisited. So there may be some wiggle room on the legal front going forward. And finally, I just want to say that I think the privacy awareness of LLMs could be improved. I mean, we saw that they have some awareness, but they're not really using it. Contextual integrity is a promising direction, but there's a lot more things that we need here. And I'm just going to end before I open it up for questions and by saying that one of the reasons, Suman, that I was excited to accept your invitation was that I really wanted to come here and encourage more work in the privacy space in India. You guys do so much work in wireless and so many different kinds of cryptography and so many different wonderful things. And I'd love to see more coming out in privacy. So it would help. We need everyone's help. Okay, so thank you, and I'm happy to take questions.
Which you can get from users and have such deep dive understanding. I think maybe I ask the question which some of us have. Most of us have kind of given up on the notion of privacy. And because we can understand what the controls are, maybe I can set it, but we have no way of verifying whether that's actually happening at the back end. And there is a famous quote goes around, Google knows more about me than I do myself. And there is a reason behind it. Maybe there is no reason behind it. So is there a way you can study what the developers are doing when the actual controls are set the way user intended to set them? Like verifiability is actually not present for most users.
Yeah, okay. Let me say a couple of things. There is an understanding or a thought that a lot of users have given up on privacy. I would argue that that's actually not correct. I think that's a myth. If you look at, I didn't get to show you, but if you look at things like the number of people writing about privacy in the reviews is going up. I think as more and more countries develop privacy laws, so Europe started privacy laws with GDPR, right? And that was let's see, about 7 or 8 years ago. And now India at that time didn't have a privacy law. Now you do, right? And many in Argentina, they didn't originally, and now they do. And so many countries are adding privacy laws, and that is bringing privacy awareness to them. In terms of trace developers, let me say a couple of things. Google recently released, maybe it's been about a year now, a product called Checks. And Checks is for developers. And actually, what it does is it helps them to do a better job in privacy. And it triangulates across 3 things. One is that it automatically reads and evaluates the privacy policy. My team actually built that component of the product. It does dynamic and static analysis on your code. And it's looking for a mismatch. If your code is doing something, like say you collect location data, but you don't declare it in the privacy policy, we figure it out and we tell the developer. Okay, and then they can fix things before they ever launch on the Play Store. So developers are using these tools, and they are doing a better job. Now, in terms of verifiability, that's a tough one. But I will say that there's more and more push for that, and the LLM world is pushing on that, right? Because people want to know what data was used in the training set. And that is a big concern by legal and government, and so I think those tools may come. I'm optimistic about that.
Saurabh Bakshi from Purdue University. So I think it's been well reported that privacy norms are quite culture-specific, nation-specific, and you got to that in your talk as well. Now, when you're looking at the reviews of privacy apps, I know that when I open up an app in India versus the US versus in Switzerland, they look a little bit different because of national laws. So the reviews potentially also reflect the fact that if you're sitting in India, you're seeing one thing. If you're sitting in the US, you're seeing something else. Is there a way to disambiguate that when you are looking at the concerns that are coming up in these reviews?
Okay, that's a great point. So in the review data itself, what we have is just a copy of what users write. We don't see that information, but it's, one could look into that. You could, I mean, it's not a very scalable process, but if you were a researcher, you can download the app and, possibly look at what it looks like in different countries and take snapshots maybe of the things that users see. And so you could enhance the analysis perhaps by mixing image analysis with the text analysis, but we haven't done that, actually. That's an interesting point. You know, I want to talk to this point. There are some culturally specific things in different countries and different cultures. As I mentioned, some people are more worried about government surveillance than others. Some people have to deal with device sharing and others. But even though we have, let's say, approximately 200 or a little over 200 countries and regions in the world, the vast majority of the concerns are really very similar, or I would say, you know, the concerns overall bucket themselves into 20 things. You know, some countries don't care about the 19th issue, but others do, but it's not as big as you think. You know, everybody wants to know, you know, what's being collected, how do I control it, and where it's going. And we see many, many instances of that because it depends, are you talking about chat messages or emails or my photos, or like the data type differs. But the fundamental questions are sort of the same, and I think that the number of issues we need to solve is actually bounded, even if you account for, you know, opinions and different kinds of cultural views towards that.
Got it. Thank you.
There's a question back there.
Morning, ma'am.
Thank you so much for a fantastic session. And in context with the summary that you just presented, you mentioned that we should avoid a proliferation of privacy agents. So 2 questions based on that. First question is why? And the second is how? Because it seems inevitable since when the first LLMs came, now we have a proliferation of LLMs.
I'm not sure you're asking me why we should worry about the proliferation
Yes.
of LLMs.
I mean, specifically privacy agents, and how is it even possible? Because everybody would like to compete in this world, and they would like to release their own agents too, just like multiple LLMs.
Yeah, okay. A couple of things. So when I said proliferation, I was really focused more not on privacy assistants, but just other personal digital assistants. And what I'm hoping is that, you know, if we learn how to make digital assistants privacy aware, that same methodology can be used by anyone, and it'll be known the same way it is for apps today, which ones are sort of privacy friendly and which ones aren't. Like, you know, and so I think that kind of awareness I hope will exist for personal. It's going to be much more important for digital assistants to make that very clear to you, because they're going to be very personal, right? But having said so, I didn't mean to say that I'm worried about the proliferation of digital assistants. I meant that it's happening, and we should actually make them. You know, if you think about obviously there are millions of apps out there, right? But a lot of these apps all use a small set of libraries to do a lot of their underlying work, right, on managing the advertising and so on. And so LLMs could also, you know, there may be many, but they may use a dozen sort of underlying core elements to help them with certain basic functionality. And so I think I'm not too concerned about that number. I just hope that they make the effort to be privacy conscious.
Thank you.
I'll take a couple more questions, so go ahead.
Morning, ma'am. I'm Rudhir from NIT Rockela. I'm basically an undergrad student over there. I want to ask you a question about a classical question, like which actually every LLMs used to incur. The term I use for that is a vanishing context problem. Many times what happens is with LLMs, you might give it a prompt, but for subjected to longer chat history or any kind of activity as such, it usually forgets what I have prompted or told him. So for example, if you have a data set and you have tagged it as confidential and said your LLM that you shouldn't be exposing this to any kind of a users or such, despite any of the things. But maybe I might be something, maybe a creepy guy who can be masking as a restaurant or such, and I would be talking with that LLM, and there are exactly like more chances that I may get those of the confidential information by chatting with it maybe 2-3 hours or more. What would you like to comment on it?
So you're absolutely right, and I would suggest that you do some research on that topic. So it's a big issue. I mean, the air gap paper that I showed you is trying a little bit to address this, right, by sort of separating out this computation of what's okay to reveal and what's not, and having that minimizer thing they proposed not interact with the person who's sort of prompting them, right? So whatever the answer is, you're limited by what the minimizer allows. So that's one idea, but I think this is a wide open field. It's a very real problem.
But don't you think, ma'am, that solution would actually double the cost of computational? Would actually make more things?
I think, not necessarily, right? So in their context, they built 6 agents. They pre-computed ahead of time what's allowed for those kinds of tasks to be shared. So then it's just a query to get the sort of minimal list from there. But it's not, it doesn't have to do any sort of real-time inference, at least in their case.
Thank you,
But
ma'am.
this is just one solution. I think there's a lot of work that still needs to be done here.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
If you will have to take the rest offline, here, all right?
Yeah, I'm happy to keep chatting in the coffee break. Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks, Nina, for a wonderful talk. Rajiv here. I was just curious to know, and you started your talk with that. There's a lot of work of late in federated learning last few years. We also try to look at the performance analysis of federated learning. But, it's not too clear what is the status today of federated learning. I mean, is it, and I know that Google has been working on it. What's the current status? Has it really taken off? And what are the performance limits over there?
So we have one deployed use case of federated learning, which is sort of the thing on your phones that when you type it predicts, tries to predict the word that's coming. There exist practical deployments. We have other things that we're thinking about using that. I think federated learning is a good technique. We have a limited number of use cases. But I think it's useful. I think it doesn't solve all problems, right? But for specific use cases, it is useful. And I would encourage. I think it's a technology that should be used more. But I guess it doesn't work in all use cases, right? So, one of the things I think that's also happening in the LLM world is, and also useful for the personal assistants, is that we're moving towards a world where our smartphones are going to have Gen AI capabilities, right? And Google has Gemini Nano, it fits on your phone. So the calculations can be done locally on your phone, and a lot of your data doesn't ever have to leave your phone. So it could be used in that world. But I think it's mostly a matter of the use case, right? Like which use case, is it a local only computation? Do I really need data from other users or not? Right, so for example, in the case of like the cookie kind of assistant, you want to just go to essential only mode. I don't need anyone else's data, to do this kind of technology. But if I want recommendations like for apps, where I might want to know what everybody else or users like me are doing with similar privacy perspectives, that might be an interesting use case for federated learning. But
So let's thank Nina one more time for our. We have a couple of little gifts.
thank you.
Yeah, there's a book.
Oh, lovely.
And then you heard of the 14 tree foundations yesterday. There's a tree planted in your name. There's a QR code that you can scan.
Wonderful,
to look up what it's doing.
Thank you very
I think
much.
they want to take a picture. Thank you. So we have a tea break now, and we will resume with lots of sessions again. So please enjoy.
Thank you.
By the way, there is also the I plus ART track that's happening downstairs, so please feel free to take advantage of that sessions as well.
I know all day today. But tomorrow, I'm going to go on for vacation. So I'll have some relaxing time, yeah.
It's a very challenging space, right? Because
Very, yeah.
most people find it very hard to kind of think through, and so an agent can help. But I wonder, when you say personalization, right? At least I have seen when I'm using different apps, based on my trust in an app, I do
Right.
different things with privacy. Those things you expect the agents may be able to work with. It's a new app. I don't know anything